Rafe Heydel-Mankoo is an historian and royal commentator and joins me now. Do you see a problem here?
Yes, well, just looking at that trailer, I mean, you can see the headlines next month, you know, Netflix November nightmare for the monarchy, for delving into what is really, you know, the most painful and distressing decade, the 1990s, in the monarchy's recent history. And the problem is, you know, that the Netflix is treating the Crown as if it's Downton Abbey. But it's not a work of fiction. These are real lives and real people, and they're living people. And this is the key point, that this is dealing with people's raw emotions and real life. And it's not as if this is a documentary. This is using drama and fiction, half-truths, and twisting reality for dramatic effect. And the impact that that can have on any person is negative, but it's also dealing with a vital institution, the monarchy, at a time of great sensitivity and a delicate moment. The succession isn't really complete yet because we still haven't got the coronation done. The monarch is still cementing the bond between the crown and the people, not just here, but importantly also in the Commonwealth Realms, where they don't really know the king that well as we do here, and also in other countries like America. And unfortunately, whether or not you have a disclaimer, and there's a question as to why it's taken 5 series for this disclaimer to come into being, at least on the trailer, we don't know whether it's going to actually be on the actual series. People do take these things as gospel. You know, I just watched recently the Elvis biopic in the cinema, which had a similar disclaimer. Now, I knew Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, was a bad guy, but I didn't know what was true, what wasn't true, but I certainly left with a negative impression. And it's all about impressions, because a month after The Crown is aired, a year after The Crown is aired, people aren't going to remember the specifics of the show, but what they're going to be left with is an impression. And it's going to be a bad, negative impression about the King and Queen at a time when their popularity has been surging and soaring, and I think that is to be lamented.
But I wonder whether you're fighting yesterday's war, because the 1990s was a very difficult decade for the monarchy. A lot of people lived through it and remember it perfectly well. A lot of other people have learnt about it. And there is stuff there which is not entirely to the credit of the members of the royal family involved. However, it seems that the country has moved on. The reception of the new king has been very, very warm. The reception of the Queen Consort has been very warm. So it looks as if we've moved on. If we've moved on in reality, haven't we also moved on in fiction? In other words, this fiction about what happened 20, 25 years ago is not really going to matter to people, because in the real world, they've already decided that it's OK, that was in the past, and we've moved on.
Well, how many of those people deciding that have done so because they're actually unaware of the stories of the past and they haven't seen it portrayed in the way that they're going to see it portrayed? Intimate moments, you know, a well-known, very sensitive phone conversation between the King and the Queen with the rather intimate affairs discussed there. Why should that become public knowledge? That wasn't an issue that the King...
Well, it was public knowledge.
Yes,
I remember reading about it.
Indeed, but why should a documentary, why should a show that's claiming to be sensitive portray something which is unnecessary for the larger story that's being told? But the important point also, I think, is about the global reception and the Commonwealth Realms. We know how delicate the monarchy is in Australia, for example, and in Canada and New Zealand it's more secure, but people haven't got to know the King and the Queen. And every time there's a royal visit to North America, 25 years after Diana's death, Diana is still brought up. And the cloud of Diana hangs heavy in North America and in Australia and New Zealand in a way that it doesn't do here, because we've got to know the King and Queen and we've got to like them very much. And I think that the damage that this will cause will just bring back and do away with so much of the positivity that's happened over the last 20 years.
So let me put a thought experiment to you. If the Crown were absolutely accurate in all its particulars, every conversation documented that occurs in the Crown, which of course is not the situation, but if it were the case, would you object to it being shown? Because it sounds to me as if part of your objection is that you don't want this stuff talked about again, not just being fictionalised.
I'm an historian, and it would not be, I would not be true to my calling if I was calling for some Stalin-esque, propagandized, airbrushed version of history. No, but the problem is, what we've seen with The Crown is a harkening back to that old idea of black and white. You have the goodies, you have Saint Diana, and then you have the negative side, which is the palace and our current King and Queen. And it's that lack of sensitivity, the lack of nuance, that I think is at the heart of the problem that we have with this series and this show, and the inability of people who aren't historians, who aren't fully aware of the facts, to distinguish between fact and fiction.
What I've taken out of the first series of The Crown until this new one, I thought it was extremely pro-Queen. And what I saw was, over those first series, the Queen was being let down by everyone. So she's let down by her prime ministers, who will get sick and resign and desert her. She's let down to some extent by her husband. She's let down by her sister, Princess Margaret. And the Queen emerged absolutely sort of radiant through all of this. So I have a feeling that it was very, very pro-Queen and did the Queen a great deal of good. And there wasn't, as I said a moment ago, this chorus of dissent then. Is it now because it's getting a bit trickier? And is it because we now have a new monarch that people are so sensitive? And let me just add to that, there does seem to be a real establishment effort to do the crown down. People like John Major, Jonathan Dimbleby, great establishment figures, Judi Dench, all coming out against it.
Well, you have to remember, of course, the royal family themselves aren't able to make that case. The royal family can't be dragged into these discussions and these debates. The royal family can't sue. And so it's not surprising that close friends and confidants of the royal family might make those interventions on their behalf. But, you know, it's quite telling. Last year, Peter Morgan, who created and wrote The Crown, wrote to his lawyers to try to get the media to suppress stories about his own private life.
Is that right?
Split from Gillian Anderson and taking up with Jemima Khan. And, you know, and previously married to an Austrian princess, a Schwarzenberg. There's enough story there for his own Netflix series. And the fact that his lawyers asked for the media not to intrude on his personal life and speculate about what happened, I think reeks of hypocrisy. And I would just ask him, or would have hoped he would have applied some of that sensitivity to the portrayal of the King and the Queen and the royal family. Not to say you don't do it, but at least apply to them what you would have them apply to you.
There is a member of the royal family who is extremely closely associated with Netflix. I refer to Prince Harry, who is making a great deal of money out of Netflix. What are the implications of all this for him and for that contract, do you think?
Well, it's quite remarkable, isn't it? As you said, we've had statements by Judi Dench and by your old friend Sir John Major on this, and yet the son of two of the principal protagonists in this drama, the grandson of the Queen, has remained silent. And why is that? Well, it's because, of course, Harry and Meghan's primary interests have always been selfish. They've always been targeted to making money at the royal family's expense. And actually, Harry and Meghan and Netflix's interests are aligned. It's about milking the royal cash cow. And what we know is essentially that they had planned. The Queen's death surprised everybody. And the plan, we understand, from Harry and Meghan was to actually have one last go at playing victim with the memoirs of Prince Harry and with this documentary series that is supposed to be coming out later this year or next year, telling all about his father and his brother respecting the Queen. And then next year there would be an attempt at reconciliation, having squeezed what they could have done out of Netflix. Now, with the Queen's death, it's one thing to criticise the Prince of Wales, but to criticise the King, the sovereign, is another matter entirely. And we understand that they are panicked and petrified about what they've already said in this documentary and in this memoir.
You've been very outspoken there. Do you think that their series, their Netflix series, and do you think that his book, Harry's book, will come out, will appear?
Well, I think it has to appear, because Netflix has to have something out of this. Now,
unless someone pays them back.
But we know full well that Prince Harry has been trying to backtrack. There have been many inconsistencies also between what he said in the documentary and what he said in the memoirs, which calls into question as to how many truths does he himself have. But certainly Netflix will have no desire to do away with a very expensive venture.
Rafe, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. That's Rafe Heydel-Mankoo.